All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Nature Journal Show. Today, I'm super excited to get the opportunity to talk once again to Miriam Morrill. Thanks for being on the show.
I'm excited to be here, Marley. Thank you.
Okay, well, as you probably know, this is a very visual audience, so it would be awesome if we could kind of get started talking about nature journaling weather by seeing some of the ways that you've incorporated weather onto your nature journal pages. Could you show us a few of your pages and ways that you've shown graphically the weather?
Basically, I would try to capture what was like, this is for a month, and what was the most interesting things I saw that were related to weather for that month. So, what was representational? So, I did have like daily logs of stuff. I would write notes and sometimes little sketches, but then I would do a more complete monthly spread. And I would track the temperature, the high and the low, wind and relative humidity for the month. And I'm zooming in here. And so I would have these rings with each little block was a day of the high and the low temperature of the colors. And then I had other little chevrons for wind and little dots for relative humidity. And then I had a little code I created here for that. But some of it was just trying to see patterns. And this evolved. So I had various circles for a long time that I was doing. And then it came to having these little leaf and stem icons out of each day for the number of, there are lots of websites that can show you the number of fires in an area. So I was doing within a 50-mile radius of where I lived. And so, and these were most likely prescribed fires in May. Some of them were potentially wildfires in the valley, Central Valley of California. But so I had these little codes for basically what came out of a certain temperature range. So that was one example of what was important that month of dry grasses. There were thunderstorms coming through in the spring and these monthly ways of tracking it. So looking at data. And I have been pretty happy with this. It's a lot of work to do every day's weather in a graph.
Yeah.
And so I don't do them for every single month. I'm looking at transitional months of either early spring to look at phenology, like what weather's really influencing bud burst and flowers and leaf out, or from for late spring into summer. So I don't do it year round because it's a lot of work. Let me show you another example of the same weather wheel for June.
Wow.
So there were some fires in the area that month, and then that. And it's actually kind of, I've noticed that it can be kind of meditative to have just to kind of put in your color code for the, each day. It helps you cue into what's happening.
Well, this is really amazing, and I think people will now have like an idea of some of the amazing visual ways that this can go in. But before we go more, I do have questions later where we can go really in depth with your practice. But maybe before we even get to that point, I have a couple other questions about why it's important to nature journal weather. But maybe even before we talk about why it's important to nature journal weather, do you have any like cool stories or like short anecdotes about times where you were out nature journaling weather?
Let's see. Yeah, right now I'm up in, we're full time in our RV, so we kind of travel around, and we're in the Pacific Northwest. And up here, obviously, there can be a lot of rain. And I have one of my journals here. And what was cool is it finally cleared up, and it was time to go take the dogs for a walk since it's not raining. And I was really excited that I went out hiking, and in the fields there were coyotes.
Whoa.
They come out and were hunting voles or mice or something out in the fields out there. And so I was really excited to see that. and then just doing my other weather stuff. But so that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Use vellum pages over the top of these to add more like so if I was looking at certain cloud types in this one here, I'll do a little skyscapedo kind of thing of clouds, and then you can use clouds to kind of predict what the change is going to be coming up. And so I would use vellum over the top of that to write what do I think is going to happen. And then I also
really
these
cool
block diagrams to look at the landscape. So the coyotes obviously was a fun one after the rain. This past spring, we were in Lone Pine on the east side of the Sierras, and the winds were crazy. And in a trailer, you get afraid at a certain point of like, oh man, this is going to tip over. You think you're at sea and you're shaking around. It was really intimidating and scary. But there were such cool clouds. Oh my gosh, with the winds that came right before, some of the winds were really crazy. Let me see if I can find that one. So this may be hard to see because it was really quick, sketchy stuff.
Be on solo there.
So I had seen, I'm trying to get over to the right spot, little small ones, but over the mountains, Mount Whitney and that area there, and it snowed on us. But it was really cool. I saw this like blanket of clouds coming in. It had some buildup in there, and then it was cloudy. And then I also did the winds, which was really cool. Sorry, I wish I had a better way to get in here. Doing before the wind gusts, and then when it was wind gusty. So I had a light color of where these willows all kind of generally straight up, and then how far they blew to one direction was really fun.
Wow.
And then particular clouds that were showing over the side of the mountains before that next evening and next day's major winds that came through. But the clouds were so fun, and it was really actually to me kind of fun to try and figure out a degree of movement in the willow trees or any kind of vegetation. So those were fun.
Cool.
Yeah, I think winds are like the most fun experience. There was also a few years ago up here in, we were in Ridgefield, Washington, near Vancouver, and it was 115 degrees, which is insane up here. And I actually went out with just a little tiny notebook and my phone to take photos during the like peak of the temperature, because I wanted to see like, what does it look like out here? And it was amazing. A lot of the broadleaf trees had either completely wilted or they'd flipped upside down.
Whoa.
Looked ghostly, like kind of white, because the undersides of them are kind of white. So here, all these trees that are flipped up, and then I didn't see them that afternoon, but over those next few days, the scorched brown, that a whole bunch of like the whole side of trees would be scorched brown. And so it was really weird to go out. It was really hot, but I just felt that I had to go out and see during the heat, and then kind of gradually did they, those leaves die, did the trees die? So those to me were fun experiences, journaling weather.
Yeah, that's really dramatic, the last one, and significant. And I think that leads to the next question. So it sounds like that took, a lot of people in 115 degree weather would not be like, okay, I'm going to go outside right now and nature journal this. So I think this segues perfectly into the next question, which is, why do you think it's important to nature journal weather? Like, what motivated you to go out in 115 degree weather? Like, why does that matter? Like, you could just draw like a cut flower in the air conditioned room or something.
Yeah. So initially my interest was just to try and be able to sense and feel conditions relevant to fire. Like, when is fire going to be extreme, whether it started or not? Just when, if a match or a cigarette were on the ground, would you have really bad fire versus no fire or not much fire? But in the process of writing my book and just digging into a lot of details, I have become obsessed, and it's kind of my new thing now, about trying to kind of almost like be in the skin of plants, like to know what are they experiencing, what is it like for them. And to me, going out in certain weather conditions kind of helps me maybe experience what the real world, what animals, what nature, what plants are experiencing. So like going out in that temperature, not only did I see stuff that was really interesting, in a way I felt like I'm connecting to what the experience of the non-human world is. And so I feel like weather, temperature, if you think about it, life on this planet is only here because we have a certain temperature range, and that allows for the water cycle. And so it's like, hey, temperature is not just data you throw on there. That's what determines that life can be here, and what species can be here, and what adaptations they have, and what their experiences are. And so to me, it's like weather, if you want to kind of feel connected and kind of embody in your journaling that experience of nature, of nature's experience, not just our experience in nature, what better way than to look at weather? So to me, I think that if you want to see nature and relate to it, you probably want to think about weather.
Yeah, that you're making a really good case for it, and I think sometimes we almost put it on the page, even with the practice of metadata. We a lot of times are kind of almost putting it weather on the page as like an afterthought, and it sounds like what you're saying, and it's not just what you're saying, but I think this is true, is that like you said, the temperature range and the weather actually determine all of that other stuff that we're nature journaling. So like this mangrove ecosystem in the photo behind me, that requires specific weather to allow for those things that we would be drawing and having so much fun nature journaling. The weather actually determines the ability for those things to be there.
And if you think about climate changes on how things are adapting and surviving, it's, to me, super interesting. And to journal it, you're not doing a scientific study, so you can't guarantee that I'm saying this and it's because of the weather, but it can add all these deep questions about, is this like my data on, I'm saying that I'm having higher than normal temperatures, or really like ups and downs, extremes, or something's different, or a different time of year, it's warmer at night in the spring, or what is, if you're seeing those, you might have much deeper questions on how is weather relating to it. And you can look for other things, but it's such a deep rabbit hole to kind of seeing what's happening around you. So to me, the weather data and the observations, and kind of being able to key into it yourself, because we go indoors, we have air conditioning, we have vehicles, and it's so rare for us to really kind of experience and be there with nature and those temperature changes or whatever's going on in the world.
Right. Yeah, it's so easy to escape it. So this is so my next question then is if this is so important, why do you think that a lot of times, like if we just went to the Nature Journal Club Facebook page right now and just sort of scanned down through 100, let's say, posts with images of people's nature journal pages, what percentage of those do you think would have weather on them at all, of those, like, in the Nature Journal, on the Nature Journal Club Facebook page? Just like if you had to guess.
If I had to guess, I would guess maybe 20% have any weather stuff. I would think that, like Roseanne Hansen and a lot of people promote always having a certain block of weather. I would think that more relevant weather, very, very few, because even like the phenology wheels and things that are including weather aren't necessarily comparing it with climate trends. Like, where is the weather we're seeing within the historic climate? So how does it fit? But I think very few, because I think it needs context, and I think that people maybe give up on it because they just put a temperature and they feel like it takes up space and it doesn't have meaning. But to me, just something simple, like not only the weather of that moment you're in there, but what was that day? What was the high and low for the day? And where did you sit within that? So you might know that, my observations were in the morning, and maybe a lot of things are going on while it's cooler and it's going to get really hot. And you might get a sense and ask more questions. And maybe for that week or that month, where did it sit? Or, the climate of what is it normally this month and where are we now? To me, just adds more of a story. So instead of just a plain one moment of weather, kind of to me seems irrelevant versus the context of weather.
Right. I'm thinking, like, if I look through my current nature journal right now, I probably have, weather metadata on a lot of my pages, but I'm also thinking I probably don't really have any, at least in my current one, I don't have any pages where like a weather event is like the main focus. So for example, like the thing you showed where the snow, or even not maybe even if it's not the main focus, even like a sub focus, like I bet I probably don't have any pages where like your page that shows the snow clouds, how they were different at the two different times on those mountains in the Sierra. I probably don't have any, and it seems like it's such an important thing. So my next question then, and I think you're starting to go in this direction already, is why do you think this is not as common of a subject in nature journaling, or what do you think are some of the obstacles that might be keeping us in the nature journaling community from nature journaling the weather more?
This is just my opinion. I'm not sure. I kind of think that a lot of data to add context can feel kind of like a chore or just drudgery of like, adding all this just data and not getting a feel for it. And it's not as visual sometimes, the data part. Now, just the observations of the clouds and that kind of stuff could be more artistic and creative, but the data. So I do feel like maybe people aren't seeing the really cool creative ways to visualize data and add relevance. So for example, just tracking the weather, and a lot of mine look unfinished because I travel, and so I'm not going to do a whole month when I'm not there a whole month. So for example, I have a half a month when I was in this area, and this is a new circle one. And I actually changed my whole color code just slightly because I wanted it to relate to, you've heard of growing degree days before?
Yes, it's like a ratio between temperatures and length of at those temperatures or something. Is it like frost hours?
So they have, it's used a lot in agriculture.
Right.
But it's also used like the U.S. Phenology Network and a lot of those, and even in fire, a lot of places have websites and track it. And basically, you can get very specific growing degree measurements or generalized for plants in general. And it's really simple math, but you take the average temperature for the day for general growing degree days, and anything below 50 degrees, you don't count. So you would subtract. So say you have 70 degrees, you'd have 20 for that day. And it's cumulative. So what's interesting, it's cumulative. So you're getting an idea of, so it's the ideal range of temperature for plant growth. So between 50 degrees and around 89 degrees are like the more ideal budding, for leaf growth, for flowering. And so if you know that temperature range is super important for growth, what is going on in your area, and is it the ideal? So maybe you're going to have slower or earlier sprouting and leaves because you've had more cumulative growing degree days. And there are cool maps that you can go on that'll show you by area what they are. So I would change to look at growing degree days. And then I have these little icons that I created. Let me try and show it here.
I'm going to put you on solo again. Wow.
So I'm tracking two different measurements, vapor pressure deficit and growing degree days. And then I switched up my color code. So And then, so whatever I had for the day, I do my calculations, and then I had my little outside things to see when is it best for more sprouting versus full leaves versus flowers. So,
Wow.
so that's cool. So, and vapor pressure deficit is another really important metric.
Uh-huh.
Relates to how plants experience the combined weather and relative humidity. And then, so I also do, this was more just fun of what was happening with the weather there. I've got little eggs coming up and different migratory birds and butterflies and things. So I was trying to add in this one, it's, I was vapor pressure deficit and growing degrees. What is that? It's all dull and horrible, but it's kind of cool to see a color code that's tied to, the colors are tied to like when it's better for growing versus, it getting a little warmer and maybe better for flowers. And then you can do a cool drawing next to it. So I think you can make it more visual and interesting versus it's taking up space in my journal with just a couple of numbers that don't mean anything. That was a long answer.
No, that's really great and really useful. And it makes me realize that a lot of the nature journaling that I do of plants, I mean, I think what can happen a lot in nature journaling is we don't, and in life in general and in nature observation in general, is we don't realize what our biases are, and we think that we're kind of going out there with an open mind and recording in our nature journal like a broad spectrum of information. But like when I nature journal plants, I'm kind of, a lot of what I'm realizing is that a lot of what I'm nature journaling is sort of superficial, or very like the things that are very visually noticeable, or things about like structural things that I can see. But like, for example, the stuff you're talking about, the plant physiology, these are like super critical things that are, maybe they're just because they're not very visible or they sound sort of technical, we're not really like thinking about them, but they actually are so important to just the survival of the plant. And it's kind of mind-boggling to realize I'm out there like drawing the shape of the leaf. Meanwhile, it's like I'm not even aware of whether the plant is like respiring or not, and the whole vapor pressure deficit thing. So I think that's super interesting. And it's also really cool that your pages are so aesthetically pleasing, because it makes it so that like people who might get freaked out by all the sciencey sounding stuff, they see that page that you're holding up, and it's like you can have both of these things. See, so I love that about your work. Let's see if there's any, like you gave some good tips already, but are there any other thoughts that you have about like what are useful ways that people can incorporate more weather into their nature journaling?
So I think having an intent on what it is you're trying to journal. So you were talking about you're capturing things that you're seeing. And so thinking about what weather is really relevant to that moment of what you're seeing. So maybe it's temperature or rain or a few things that are obvious. But a lot of what I'm looking at have to do with patterns. And so that one moment may not be as relevant. So like a tip I would say is maybe using something similar to a perpetual journal type of thing, or keeping just general notes and maybe some very basic sketches, but even just a lot of notes at first about the trends you're seeing. So like I'm seeing a lot of new green, short green grass, or now I'm seeing a lot of these types of flowers, or the trees have flowers, but they don't have leaves, or what are the trends you're seeing? And then if you're taking your weather data, looking at, now, because you can kind of compare of like, I'm seeing trends in, we've had a few cold snaps, or we've had hot, or it's just generally warming, and comparing the trends of what you're seeing. So I think recognizing you don't necessarily, if you don't know what you're looking for, just keeping track of general observations related to phenology. I think phenology and migration are really low-hanging fruit to weather. And so I think that thinking about phenology observations, migration observations, and comparing that to your weather data trends. And you might start to see really cool relationships, especially if you create visuals like I've got. And don't get intimidated that you have to do this every month, every year. Try it for like critical periods of time. I like to target early spring of when bud burst and some interesting things are happening. And then I like to transition to where, to me, rolling into fire season, I think fall and color changes is another interesting one to look at. But a lot of details and digging in and looking at trends, not necessarily trying to capture, really detailed, nice stuff for that moment you're in time, but tracking trends. So those would be some tips, I think.
Okay, cool. So let me give you those are really great tips, and I'm going to write those up to help people out and put them in the description down below. And I'll do like an article about this as well. But so here's like a scenario one. I'm going to be going to Baja California in 2 days, and I'm going for with a group of scientists who are working in the intertidal zone, and I'm going to be like nature journaling a lot while I'm there, and I'll probably be there for like 5 days, but I'm only going to be in this one place for like 5 days. What kind of like weather stuff could I incorporate into my nature journal if I'm only going to be I'm not going to be in a place for like a long time?
This is what I do, and this may not work for other people. I like to gather some background information about an area and recognize that I'm not capturing enough data to make a scientific study, but it allows me to ask questions. I think setting your mind to recognizing I can include this stuff, and it's not necessarily going to connect, but it can give me different questions and frame things. So I personally look up information about that ecosystem where I'm going, and maybe that eco region, and try and find out what are the climate trends for that time of year. And maybe for you, it's tidal patterns as well, or, different things, or maybe even precipitation for that. And so is that influencing something going on there, the mix of fresh water and salt water? But I personally like to look up that, and you can't always find information for that exact area. They don't always have the kind of climate and other stuff. I like to look at keystone plants, or things that are important. So maybe there's certain types of algae or certain things in that area, and things that your patterns connect to. So whether ecoregion type information of these types of things are important for that ecosystem, and I kind of try to, am I seeing those in there? There's no guarantee, but it just helps me frame things. So I get a little background information, and if I can find more specifics, so not just general climate, because that can just be a range for the whole year, but for that season can be really helpful. And then that ecosystem and what's foundational within that ecosystem, they may have certain kind of thresholds that are important. So even water temperature, a lot of maybe the things you're looking at maybe have a preference of certain temperatures. So that's the kind of stuff I do, quick little internet search and try and find some of that stuff, and helps me think it through.
Great. So I'm sure a ton of people are going to ask this question, but do you have like certain online resources that you like for looking up weather?
National Weather Service has what's called the Fire Weather Dashboard. And it has, at first it has, I may have too much reflection. It'll have, there it is. And that's across the US. And then I can plug in where I am into it, and then I can click on a link to more information. It gives a lot of stuff, and you can ignore it or you can look at it, and it gives graphs. So I really like that one, because you can just pull out the basic stuff, but if you get more advanced, you can go in there and get more details. So National Weather Service is kind of my go-to.
And that's a website, not an app, right?
Site, yeah. Okay. I just have it marked on my phone so I can pull it up and look at it. So that's one of my go-to. I also really like Weather Underground. They have the weather, like more history, weather history. And so you can log in your location. It'll bring up your location, and then there's some tabs under there, and one says history, and I'll click on that, and often it shows another area within that climate weather region. And that's usually because that whatever area you're in may not have long-term data, and so it pulls you to the nearest long-term data source to give you history. But that's kind of cool to go backwards and look at it, for a certain month or a certain, time, what was the temperature range like, or all these details. So I like Weather Underground as well.
Okay, so let's talk about your book. I'll put up your website here in case people don't know about it, and you're also Pyrosketchology on Instagram and on other platforms as well.
On X or Twitter, I have an account there. I'm not super active on any of them. I do a little bit of stuff there, but people can contact me. But I am on Instagram, Facebook, and X.
Okay.
And so let's see, my book, Pyrosketchology, it's almost 300 pages, and it's how to an illustrated guide on how to nature journal about the fire environment. But don't think that the fire environment is just flames and smoke. I have an entire chapter on weather, and it's all based on observation. So I've kind of distilled all the science into what does that look like? And then how can you use that? Because looking at clouds is cool, but what are the clouds telling you? To me, that's really cool. And so I have information on that. The temperature ranges, I mentioned that for fire and for plants, because I do talk a little bit about what's important, the vapor pressure deficit. I describe a lot of that stuff under seasons. But I tried to tease out what to look for, how to track it in journaling, and how to make it meaningful. So I do have weather. Let me see if I can, going over looking at sky color and how that can associate to using the cyanometer and relative humidity. I have the cloud types illustrated, and how that can help you make predictions and what it means. Most of the clouds I use are telling me about wind predictions. Because in fire, wind is so critical. So I have that entire chapter on what to look for weather. I have topography is very important in fire. And so what is important? Looking at the aspect, the elevation, the slope. So I define those. I have them super illustrated, how they influence winds. So for example, trying to get where you can see them, all these different wind types and how topography influences them and what it can tell you.
Wow.
Fuels, which is basically vegetation, what's important to look at, just the whether the vegetation community, but the concentrations, the moisture, the oils, all that kind of stuff, how to journal them. I also have canopy cover, how to journal canopy cover, a mix of things like that. I have seasonal stuff, which is also not just the weather chapter, but seasons is very strong on weather, but tracking trends. And so within that, I also include descriptions of vapor pressure deficit of tree rings. Tree rings are super cool that you can not only tell the fire history in the area, you can get a pretty good idea of the temperatures and the moisture based on your tree rings. And so how to look at tree rings and how that I have graphs, weather graphs tied to tree rings, and how you can kind of compare and think about, so it was a pretty moist or, nice temperatures, or it got really hot, and all of a sudden you start to see changes in how tight or wide these tree rings are. So I think that stuff's really cool. Stuff in fire, they have what's called season-ending events. So when you have enough rain, that fire season will end. And what's cool is the type of puddles, how big they are, you can determine like this is a fire season ending event. So I illustrated the
Wow.
puddles and how you could tell that in a forest or in a grassland, is that a season ending event?
Wow.
So lots of stuff like that. Then I do obviously have a fire and smoke. And so how to look at fires and know, you know, is that kind of a typical moderate fire behavior? Is that extreme? Everything from fire tornadoes to just, you know, creeping ground fires. So I've described those different kinds of fire behaviors, how to look at a smoke plume, and that can tell you what's burning, how intense or dangerous the fire is. So I have illustrations of comparing different smoke plumes. You know, is it just kind of wispy? Is it really building up and creating its own weather? And so those things, the color of smoke can tell you a lot. If it's really black, really white, kind of tan, there are a lot of things involved, but they can tell you a lot. So I have a lot of that. And then the post-fire stuff, I would think a lot of people would be very interested in on fire severity, because a lot of people see char, like a dark landscape, and they just think, oh, it's terrible. And it might be wonderful. So how do you look at a burned landscape and know that's actually pretty nice or pretty good for the landscape? And that's pretty severe. So how do you get rid of your bias and look at a charred landscape?
That's so interesting. My dad lives in a part of Costa Rica that is sort of almost like this. It's almost like a monsoon climate. It's the southernmost extension of sort of what you get in parts of Arizona, where they have, you know, like it just started raining. They just had their fire season ending event like recently, but like he was sending me pictures of some of the fires that they were having. Like a couple weeks ago or months ago, and partly because of thanks to you, partly because of my experiences, like going to see fires and prescribed fires with you and the stuff that I've learned, I was like looking at some of them, and he was being very dramatic. I mean, he's lived there for a really long time, and he kind of likes dramatic stuff, but like some of the videos and the pictures he was sending to me, I was like, that kind of looks like good fire, or it kind of looks like, you know, that doesn't look like something I would be freaking out about per se. And it made me actually have questions about, like, I wonder what role fire played in the ecology of this area even before people lived there, or, you know, I wonder what fire severity and frequency was like in the you know, recent past, or like pre-Columbian times. And I also got to explore some areas because a fire did go around his house a couple years ago, and when he was telling me about it on the phone, it sounded very scary and everything. But then when I went there after the fire, based on like what I saw in the vegetation and everything, it looked like, and the response, there was a lot of biodiversity coming back, and a lot of stuff that wasn't there before. So it was kind of cool to be able to apply a slightly more fine-toothed sort of perspective on fire, instead of just seeing flames and seeing charcoal and thinking like, oh, this is like bad and just a natural disaster.
Cool. That's awesome.
So, okay, this is so fun. I feel like I could talk about this stuff forever with you, and people definitely check out Miriam's website. It's amazing. And your book, is your book on there? Is your whole book on there for free as well?
I have a free PDF, the whole book that's on there, and then you can order it through bookstores, and I think it's cheaper on Amazon, and it's on Amazon as well.
Oh, cool.
So I self-published kind of through two platforms that allow schools and bookstores to order, or people to get it through. Regular people can't get it through the one site that a school or a bookstore can. Okay, but anyone can get it from Amazon, so it's out there.
All right, so folks, go check it out on Amazon and support this amazing work that Miriam is doing. The book is amazing. Obviously, you've seen her illustrations are super cool. So, all right, I think it's. I have a couple more questions here before the lightning round. How are you feeling, energy-wise? Good. Okay, so I wanted to ask you one other thing before we get into. Well, actually, two things before the lightning round, but. I noticed you mentioning a couple times in our conversation today, and then I also see it in your pages, this idea of feeling. So I think sometimes, the topic of weather can sound, and some of what you're talking about, it sounds very like scientific, and people can get intimidated by that. But I've noticed you use the word feeling a lot, and some of your pages have like a lot of drawings of like people's faces and stuff like that. Could you talk a little bit about your thoughts around feeling and how to incorporate that into nature journaling weather?
Yeah. So I want to improve what is called situational awareness, where it's almost automatic, like instinctual, that you cue into something. It's like you feel something, and so that's kind of this way that humans used to be, that you'd hear something or you'd smell something and know it's important. And so I want to train myself, my senses, so that it's almost automatic that I can recognize when conditions are changing. So I definitely Beaufort wind force scale. I'm
Hmm.
trying to tune into what does it see and what does it feel like, but temperature too. So I was practicing ways to journal temperature on how does it feel to me? What is
Mm.
the temperature range that's important that I want to key into?
Mm.
What does that feel like? So just repeating like, oh, okay, it's going to be in this temperature range. And you might want to be thinking about cooler and tying it to phenology. I'm tying it to fire. So when temperatures start to get close to that 75 to 80 is what I want to cue into. So, regularly trying to spend time, and how do I handle that temperature? What does it feel
Mm.
like? How does my breathing feel? And then trying to capture that. And it could be something simple like, it's kind of or I love it, it's perfect weather, creating these little visual
Yeah.
codes. Using the color codes, you could have a little happy face or a little face expression with the color codes. And I feel like when I flip back through my journals, if I do want to like relate to it or remember it, I feel like it's easier to find and
Mm.
easier for me to quickly realize that those observations during that time, like my red color code is for really like could be extreme fire when it's those
Mhm.
temperature ranges. So I could flip through if I always put it in the same corner, the temperature stuff, the color code, and oh, there's red days. What am I seeing? Oh, I'm
Mhm.
starting to see this. So yeah, I feel like tuning into it, and a lot of weather too, like in how it relates to plants and fire and things like that, can be tactile and what you smell, because plants, not only you're going to start to smell like more like straw and dry grass, which has an interesting scent,
Mm.
but some of them put off a lot of oils
Yeah.
and these really strong, almost astringent scents when it gets hot. And so learning to tune in and let that cue you into what's changing in the weather.
Mm.
And even like a lot of prescribed fires, people test. You were there when they did like the fuel
Yeah.
moisture, but you can do it just with leaves and pine needles. Or I like to run my hand through grasses as I'm going by when it's kind of dry, and when there's still enough relative humidity, moisture for it to be not too extreme fire. You should be able to still bend dry grasses. They should
Mhm.
still bend, even though they're dead.
Yeah.
Um, but there's enough moisture that comes in. But when it's really dry and the relative humidity is really low, they would crack and crumble in your hand,
Mhm.
completely snap pine needles and leaves and
Yeah.
grasses. And so to me, that's a really cool sound, scent, texture kind of observation that relates specifically to weather,
Mhm.
and the weather data. So you can just really have these really powerful ways to connect your body to that boring data.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. That's so cool. Okay. Let's do the lightning round. I had some questions. I know people are always super curious about like materials, and I know there's going to be a ton of questions about like how you paint clouds and stuff like that, but maybe we could approach that at a different time. But let's get into the lightning round here, so that we don't run out of time. Are you ready for the lightning round? No?
I'll do the best I can.
Okay. Let me make the. There we go. And you said you can't make a lightning sound.
I don't think so.
Okay, I'll do it. Choo! That was pretty bad, but okay. So, all right. First are these sort of quick questions. Some of them are like yes or no, or just like one word answers, right? Or, wait, where did my questions go? There they are. I've been having a lot of computer issues lately, so my computer's not ready for the lightning round.
Oh,
All
you
right.
can wait.
Okay, is coffee an essential art supply?
Yes.
Organized or messy?
God, I'm kind of so in between. In between. Can I give that answer?
Yeah, that's actually what most people I interview is that's what they say. Do you like to nature journal alone or with other people?
Alone.
Does your family understand your nature journaling?
No.
Snacks?
Yes.
Are you a perfectionist?
Yes.
Would you rather nature journal plants or animals?
And plants now used to be animals, but it's plants now.
Okay. Ink or graphite?
Graphite.
Do you ever put art supplies in your mouth?
Yes.
Big picture or micro?
Big picture.
Would you rather nature journal on Mars or the deep sea?
The deep sea.
Fast or slow?
Slow.
What face do you make when someone comes up to you and says, "You're so talented, I could never do that"?
I don't know if I'd let him get close enough to ask.
Okay, great. All right, so the next few lightning round ones are slightly longer questions. If you could nature journal with any historical figure, who would you want to nature journal with?
Hmm. I think Beatrix Potter, just because I am also a huge like children's book fan and like
Mm-hmm.
fantasy fan. It like it sounds silly to like make animals into clothes, but there's something I find seems like she crossed over really interesting ways. So I just love that she could do really cool botanical illustrations, but then could also create these really heartwarming stories. So I
Great.
don't. I think I would like her.
That would be really fun. I would love to see the pages that you all come up with on your nature journaling trip. That would be awesome. Okay, if there was an Olympics for nature journaling, what event would you compete in?
Hmm. Holy moly. Oh, maybe the javelin throw.
And are you throwing like a pencil or something?
I think I'm thinking of it more symbolic. Like I like to like just throw
Mm.
it out there. Like I don't know what I'm gonna hit, but
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna throw it as hard as I can. So it's sort of like
Nice.
whether it's data or something, I want to like
Yeah,
hit something. So I'm just gonna
great.
yeah.
Cool. I love that one. Okay, so if you were stuck on a desert island with all your survival needs taken care of, what five nature journaling supplies would you take with you?
I would take obviously a journal,
Hmm.
the paper,
Hmm.
watercolor paints,
Hmm.
water brush,
Hmm.
and my safari fountain pen,
Hmm.
a pencil.
All right, that's five. That's pretty good. You came up with that pretty fast. All right, and then the last one is which do you watch? Have you read Harry Potter before? Okay, so which Harry Potter character do you think would be best at nature journaling?
Kind of feel like Hermione.
Yeah, yeah, she'd be good, I think too. Nice. All right. Good job in the lightning round. Um, you survived very well. So I just have a couple follow-up questions here, and we have enough time to maybe briefly touch on your materials and your approach. It looks like you use toned paper a lot. Do you use gouache, or what are some of your main tools that you use? Because I think people are going to be very interested in the um,
So
the the approach.
I think it's maybe been a mistake to like, I was trying to find what do I like. So I buy all these different kinds of journals. So I have a lot of toned paper and a lot of things because somebody'd go, oh, I use this. So I'd have to buy that.
Right.
But I'm a trailer, so I can't keep too much stuff. So I have to learn to control myself. But I do use toned paper, but I think all in all, I like just a slight off white if I were to have to settle down on one. I've also learned to love, because so much of what I'm doing now, I have a lot of data and I can't do a straight line at all. Even with a ruler, I screw it up usually. So, and my writing is terrible. I have fallen in love with dot paper, like dot journals, like bullet journals. I did find a watercolor journal that's dots as well.
Whoa, no way.
And so I've been really excited to start in this, and that way I have my little dots that can help me create straight lines to keep my print within a certain size. So I'm very excited about that, because I do like to try to create straight lines or measure out areas for tables and things. So I'm happy that I found that recently. I do like toned paper for outdoors because I think that I don't get the reflection as much. The sunlight, it feels made like it, and I feel like I don't have to use as many colors often for the kind of stuff I'm journaling. I used to go really, really big, but I kind of feel like it's easier to hold, and I feel like I'm more likely to finish pages if they're smaller now. So I've kind of started going up smaller, but I used to go pretty big.
And what gouache do you use usually?
I don't use that much gouache. I have a white that I keep with my watercolor stuff. I do have a gouache paint set, and it was just like the one thing I could find in an area. So it is.
So you usually use colored pencil for most of your color?
I do kind of a mixed media approach. So I have a small watercolor thing that's my go-to in the field, and then I have the one that you get from Jack that I use to finish stuff up at home. Watercolors, I think a lot of what you see is just a thick watercolor.
Really?
So a lot of times do layers of watercolor over it.
I have no idea.
And then, but I do have the white gouache that's in my watercolor set. I always have the white to make it pop out there. I also sometimes add colored pencil, and I think sometimes my watercolor paint pops out because I do often go back over and detail whatever my pen or pencil or something was with it, and I think sometimes that can pop. But yeah, I don't use that much gouache, even though I like the look of it.
I just assumed that's what it was because the color is so vibrant on the toned paper. So my last sort of technique question is, do you have any tips for clouds? Your clouds always look amazing, and I know that clouds are often challenging.
It's funny you say that they're amazing, because I always feel like they're terrible and they're painful when I do them. To me, it's most important, maybe letting go of trying to make the cloud look perfect. It's more important to kind of decipher, is it a high cloud, high in the atmosphere, a middle cloud, a low cloud? So I usually do a portrait type, not try to create the full landscape. This snapshot, if I'm not taking up a lot of space, of high, middle, and low, and the cloud type. And so at the very least, trying to differentiate, is it more of a stratus kind of cloud that's kind of loose, or is it a cumulus and it's got a flat bottom and it's building up, or becoming more of a cumulonimbus where it's really building up? So to me, maybe they're coming out because I'm just at a minimum trying to decipher the type of cloud. So
Mm.
doing that sort of thing, I think maybe helps. But to me, I don't necessarily, unless it's a paid illustration or I'm creating it as art. If I'm trying to do it as a illustration that I want to look pretty, I use more colors.
Mm.
I'll,
Oh,
having
I see.
some purples and blues within the shadows, and really bright whites, but even maybe some yellow or blue to contrast against that bright white along the top that gives you the
Mhm.
idea that sunlight's coming through. So to me, it's some layering that I'll usually have some darker colors, and to make it pop is where I'd use the gouache. But
Mhm.
it's I first need that kind of a rounded, darker, multicolor stuff.
Okay. All right, cool. So my last closing question here is what do you think, and I think I asked you this before on the climate change panel, but what do you think is the future of nature journaling?
Mm, interesting. What I don't know if I could predict what it will
Like
become
where
versus what I want it to become.
Sure, let's hear that. Yeah.
Would want it to become.
Mhm.
I really would want it to become this full body sensory training experience, because I feel like for myself and so many people, we're indoors, we're online, we're in the TV, we're bombarded by so many other things that I don't feel like we're in our bodies as much. And so I almost feel like we have to fight against the AI, and we have to fight against
Mhm.
all these things taking us out of the actual real world. And so I think having that as a counterbalance to the over technology of
Mhm.
connecting your body and your senses. So to me, I think art will always be there, but I think some people may turn to AI for art. And so
Mhm.
really leveraging and hitting hard the value of this is a way to document and enhance your observation skills and bring out your sensory capabilities.
Wow, that's really cool. Like a more embodied nature journaling. Cool. Is there anything else that I didn't ask or we didn't have a chance to talk about that you think is essential for this conversation?
I think having more conversations, or maybe as people get together, that people try to promote how would you journal weather here. Anybody have ideas of how we can integrate it more? I think that it's easy to get into what you're seeing, and that's exciting and it's valuable. But I think going out with people and promoting and trying to describe and experience connections with weather, I think that would be fun and helpful for people to get it from hear it from different people and see it in different ways. I think it'd be really fun to, in more groups, explore how to journal weather.
Yeah, I think everybody learns better and benefits when we can get more brains working on it for sure. Great. Well, thank you so much for making the time to be on the show. And everybody, definitely check out Miriam's website. There's a lot of really cool resources, and you can get good ideas about nature journaling weather there. And check out her book on Amazon or on her website. It's a lot of great ideas. It's a really rich resource, and it's been really cool watching how you have done such a deep dive into this aspect of nature journaling. And a lot of times over the years when I've seen stuff that you've posted, I've just been like it's just been so exciting and kind of mind-blowing to see like your phonology wheels. I've only like experimented a teeny bit with phonology wheels, but when I see yours I'm always like, wow, that is really inspiring. So I really appreciate you and feel like you're sort of a thought leader in the nature journaling community. So I always feel like really great talking to you and sharing like your ideas with other people, so that like more people, because I feel like you're one of the people who's really testing out new things and like really testing out like what is possible with nature journaling. So thanks for pushing the boundaries and making it possible.
Thanks, Marley. It's That's awesome. That's fun. And it's so nice to know people like you and have friends like you and Yves and Jack. And it makes it all so much more interesting and
Yeah.
tangible. And I don't know how to say it, but thank you. It's great to be able to talk to you again.
Great. All right. Well, everybody go home and nature journal the weather around you. Bye.